I played every Portal game. Here's my thoughts. Portal is a series of games developed by Valve Software and is set in the same universe as the Half-Life series. The main games in this series are puzzle platformers, with the rest of them being either tech demos or side stuff, but this is going to be a broad overview of all of them. First though, I really want to shout out my patrons, including Melancholis in the Omega Gamer tier, and that's just Ash and Mikup Lohan Sogan in the Played Every Game tier. And of course, everyone you see on your screen here. I truly appreciate your support. Alright, let's get into the games. Portal was released in 2007. This game is a first-person puzzle platformer. First, let's talk gameplay. On the surface, the immediate presentation here is like a first-person shooter, right? I mean, you're holding a gun that shoots things, but no, it's actually a gun that fires portals. There's a blue portal and an orange portal. When you go into one, you come out the other. Super simple. On top of that, if you fire a portal into a surface that's facing another direction, your orientation is automatically adjusted when you leave the portal. However, this game also has a huge focus on physics, especially momentum. This means that if you go into a portal super fast, you'll come out of it super fast. And this is actually a huge focus of some of the puzzles. Like some, where you have to convert your downward momentum into upward momentum to launch yourself onto a platform. Of course,
on top of just firing portals, there's more things to interact with here too. There's buttons that you can stand on to activate what I'm going to call circuits, and these circuits can activate doors and other interactables. Usually though, stepping off of these buttons deactivates the circuit, meaning that you have to place a cube on top of them. Additionally, there's lots of hazards, including this water that kills you if you fall in, lasers that'll hurt you if you touch them, and outright turrets that you have to avoid being targeted by. All of these factors combined make for a pretty entertaining puzzle-solving experience. When you boil it down, it's pretty easy to understand.
Visually, this game shows its age a bit, but an excellent art style keeps it looking great aesthetically, even though it's over 15 years old. The best way I can describe this style is that of a super clean, almost hospital clean, eggshell white sci-fi aesthetic. Before I continue talking about the visuals though, let me talk about the narrative. In this game, you awake as a test subject in the lab of a company called Aperture Science. The game is broken up into discrete test chambers where you use a portal gun, a device that allows you to create two portals that allow you to seamlessly teleport to the other end. During all of these tests, you are constantly being monitored and spoken to by the facility's AI, GLaDOS. GLaDOS, right off the bat, comes off as cynical and untrustworthy, but assures you that you will receive a reward in the form of cake for completing all of these test chambers.
The center is committed to the well-being of all participants. Cake and grief counseling will be available at the conclusion of the test. Thank you for helping us help you help us all.
What's interesting though, is that as you progress through the chambers, GLaDOS's attitude changes from deceptive to almost outright hostile. Additionally, you begin to discover cracks in the facility leading to places you weren't supposed to see, with warnings and pleas for help from previous test subjects. It quickly becomes really clear that no matter what GLaDOS says, this test will not end well for you, and you eventually have to escape the test chambers entirely. Now back to the visuals.
The super hospital clean aesthetic strikingly contrasts the areas that you're not supposed to see, showing just how grimy Aperture Science itself really is. This environment also naturally leads the player to question, where are all of the employees? Why are there so many empty rooms? This all gives the game an eerie yet distinct feel. Nothing is alive, just you.
This leads me to the writing. This game's writing is incredibly witty and entertaining at every turn. While the game's narrative is only a couple of hours long, there's so much character packed into GLaDOS's ever-present dialogue. It's funny most of the time, but outright creepy at others. That's not even taking into account the environmental storytelling, which I've mentioned before. All of these test chambers that are devoid of human life still have plenty of signs that, at some point, humans were here. Is it creepier to be observed, or to wonder why you aren't being observed when you definitely should be? The beauty of this game is that if you strip away the clever writing, strip away the unique aesthetic, and everything else but the game's puzzle mechanics, you still have an excellent game. Everything is executed incredibly well, and while this game is more than the sum of its parts, the parts themselves are all incredible on their own. So as I mentioned before, you eventually leave the test chambers and begin to escape through the back areas of the Aperture Science test labs. While normally the developers could have just made this a quick escape sequence, these areas are actually basically like test chambers themselves. Every area is its own puzzle that has to be solved with portals, physics, and sometimes even quick thinking.
Oh, sorry, I have like a cold or something. Plus, without the visual guides of circuit lines and buttons, these areas actually freshen up the experience quite a bit and require you to adjust how you think about the solutions. At the end, you encounter GLaDOS herself and have to defeat her by redirecting her own rockets at her with your portals. Then, you toss the dislodged personality cores into a furnace. Once you defeat her, she breaks down and you're taken to the surface where, for just a brief moment, you see the outside world before you're ominously dragged away. As
the credits roll, you hear a really cool song performed by GLaDOS herself, called Still Alive. While I can't play it here for obvious reasons, it's a perfect little cherry on top of an already amazing game. Once you've completed the game, you unlock several bonus maps, which are split into two separate categories, Advanced Chambers and Challenges. The Advanced Chambers are revamped versions of previous chambers with added complexity, while the challenges are selectable limitations you can place on yourself to complete certain chambers, which can be using as few portals as possible, moving as little as possible, or completing the chamber as fast as possible. The Xbox 360 version of Portal actually received a map pack and eventually an updated release with this map pack called Portal Still Alive. This version included a bunch of extra maps adapted from a map pack based on an unofficial Portal fan game called Portal, the Flash version. While this map pack never made it to PC, you can download it from third-party websites and play these maps anyway. These maps are a nice addition, though they focus a lot more on pressure and time-based puzzles than the base game does.
So at the end of 2022, Nvidia announced a fancy schmancy new tool that would become available to their RTX cards called RTX Remix. While I won't be going into a ton of detail about what RTX Remix is, it's basically a way to modify games that run using DirectX 8 and 9 by allowing for completely revamped ray-traced lighting, along with what is basically just hot swapping in new assets, including replacing models and textures with physically based materials with much higher detail. While Nvidia's original presentation focused a lot on the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, they finally released a full remaster of the original Portal using this RTX Remix framework as a sort of demo for the technology.
This version of the game is mechanically identical to the original game, but with a clear new layer of visual polish and general artistic changes. There's now fully ray-traced lighting, materials have physically based properties, meaning metals shine realistically and reflections look super neat. However, while the visuals here are pretty fancy, you could argue that the original game's art is somewhat lost in the quest to show off all these new fancy RTX Remix features. That being said, it's definitely up to personal taste, and the new look here doesn't really bother me. This version of the game doesn't run too great on my 3060 though, so I couldn't crank it up to max settings unfortunately. So, Portal is, in my opinion, one of the greatest games ever made, hands down. It's not a very long game, but what they managed to cram into this little package is something incredibly special. The groundbreaking gameplay mechanics, the timeless visual style, and the incredible writing all make for a really special experience. If you've never played this game, I wholeheartedly want you to know that you are missing out. While I did spoil the overall story, that's not even really a big deal to me here, because the moment-to-moment gameplay is what's truly special. Now, I won't be completely spoiling Portal 2's story, but we'll get to that. Either way, play Portal if you haven't. If you can't play it for whatever reason, watch a playthrough at the very least. I promise it's worth it. Portal, the Flash version, is a Flash fan game based on Portal that was actually released the day before the original game, but was eventually made semi-official because some of its levels were actually repurposed for bonus levels in a re-release of the official game. This game is a 2D side-scrolling implementation of a couple of Portal's core mechanics, namely the portals themselves and the momentum-based physics. What this game does differently from Portal though, is putting more of a focus on what I'd call pressure-based stages. This means stages that have a bunch of lethal challenges that focus more on agility and speed rather than just time. For example, there's a lot of spike trap levels where you have to move fast enough to avoid getting crushed, which isn't the kind of thing you saw in the original game. Of course, this game's entire premise is based on the fan developers' knowledge of the game prior to release, so seeing interesting and fun twists on the gameplay formula not influenced by the full game is actually pretty neat. and probably for the best to make this experience stand apart from the official game. It's also pretty cool seeing that the map pack for the first game uses a lot of these same concepts too. That being said, this game is also kind of hard, at least coming off of the main game, which is primarily a puzzle game, more so than an action platformer like this is. Either way, it's a fun game and definitely worth a try if you've never gotten the opportunity. Hey, also it's free, which is nice. Portal 2 was released in 2011. Visually, this game is a pretty big departure from the first game, both in style and fidelity. Right off the bat, you can tell that the production value for this game is significantly higher, both in visuals and in presentation. There's now a bunch of dynamic cutscenes, more interactive and animated elements in the game map, and far more visual variety in the environment. Because this game is set a significant time after the first, you actually see the test chambers overrun with vegetation and old, broken, and rusty surfaces. As you progress even further, for story reasons, you actually end up in a much older, far more retro Aperture Science testing lab. These environments are really cool because you see a lot of the same things you encountered in the more modern testing labs, but with a retro, almost prototype aesthetic. This game's gameplay is identical to the first game in its basic concept. You have a portal gun that can fire 2 portals, and using it, physics, and a little bit of ingenuity is how you solve puzzles. There's a bunch of new mechanics here though, including jump pads, gels that mess with your speed or allow you to bounce, lasers that fire into little receptacles to activate circuits, and glass cubes that allow you to redirect lasers. On top of that, there's been a few smaller changes, like the ability to zoom in to see distant things more clearly, and, my favorite, a fun dynamic music effect which speeds up as you increase speed, usually when you're flying through the air with momentum. You can also see the location of your portals through walls, which is a great quality of life feature and helps a lot when some of the stages in this game are pretty sprawling. This game is a lot more narrative focused than the first game, which shows almost immediately. The game has a ton of dialogue and, more importantly, more characters. In the first Portal game, the only voice you heard was GLaDOS's. Sure, you occasionally heard the little pre-programmed voice lines from the turrets and the little personality cores you knocked off, but it was primarily focused on GLaDOS. In Portal 2, you meet Wheatley the personality core right away. Of course, GLaDOS returns too, and during the retro test chambers, you hear pre-recorded dialogue from Cave Johnson, the founder of Aperture Science. The writing in this game matches and, at many points, even exceeds the excellent writing from the first game. It's really hard to convey good writing in a video like this without going into a full video-length deep dive, so I'll try to keep it succinct. In both of these games, a lot of your time is spent attempting to sort of work out how to solve every discrete puzzle. As the puzzles become more complicated, they require more focus. After a while, putting that kind of focus onto individual puzzles can become mentally exhausting for some, me included. The beauty of Portal, though, is that you'll be solving a puzzle and make the smallest amount of progress, and rather just feeling rewarded for completing the puzzle, you are also rewarded with a witty comment from GLaDOS or Cave Johnson. You know what? It's better to show than tell.
Heads up, that coffee we gave you earlier had fluorescent calcium in it so we can track the neuronal activity in your brain. There's a slight chance the calcium could harden and vitrify your frontal lobe. Anyway, don't stress yourself thinking about it. I'm serious. Visualizing the scenario while under stress actually triggers the reaction.
Plug me into that stick on the wall over there, yeah? And I'll show you something. You'll be impressed by this. Yeah, I can't do it if you're watching. Seriously, I'm not joking. Could you just turn around for a second? All right, you can turn around now. Bam! Secret panel. Not open. While your back was turned, and off we go.
Hi. So, how are you holding up? Because I'm a potato. Oh, good. My slow clap processor made it into this thing. So we have that.
So, unlike Portal 1, I actually won't be spoiling Portal 2's story. While you can beat Portal 1 in a couple of hours, Portal 2 is significantly longer with significantly more story elements. And I believe that unlike Portal 1, I believe Portal 2's story is more than just its moment-to-moment gameplay, which, in my opinion, is actually one of the best things about it. Plus, just trying to cover all of the wild lore stuff this game introduces would probably take an entire full-length video anyways. This doesn't make it a better game by default, but it does mean that Portal 2 distinguishes itself from Portal 1 in a really interesting way. There's something I want to address for a second though. One of Portal 1's strengths was how tight of an experience it was. From beginning to end, it just never stopped. There were no real slow moments, it just got right into it. Portal 2, on the other hand, has you stopping to explore, taking in the scenery, and breathe, making it at times a slower paced experience. This isn't necessarily a bad thing by any means, but it does mean that some people may not enjoy it as much, if that's not the kind of experience they're looking for. Some people might just want a straightforward puzzle game, and while I argue that Portal 2's extended length is one of its strengths, I have seen people complain about this before too. I guess it really just depends on your personal tastes and preferences. Either way, I really enjoy Portal 2's story, and it takes some pretty wild turns. I know I've spoiled games in the past on this channel, and I will probably spoil a lot more games in the future, but for this particular game, I've decided I won't because I think it's something everyone should experience for themselves. Plus, my spouse hasn't played the game, and I really don't want to spoil it for them. This game adds a few new modes. First is co-op. This can be played with up to 2 players, either locally or online. In this mode, you're playing as one of 2 little robots, either named Atlas or Peabody. There's an entire set of unique co-op challenges you can play, and they can all be accessed from a hub area. These challenges are a lot of fun, and GLaDOS has a ton of dialogue throughout it. While it's a bit less cohesive than the main story, solving these puzzles is genuinely fun, though if you're playing with someone else, it can lead to arguments. There's a couple of co-op only mechanics here, including emotes and the ability to ping locations to help with communication. What I love about the co-op here is how they were able to make puzzles that could only work with co-op. For example, some puzzles require one player to fire portals for the other to reach places they otherwise wouldn't be able to, or firing portals in very specific locations in a very specific order to avoid having to backtrack all the way to the beginning. If you have a friend who enjoys puzzles, this game's worth buying just for the co-op mode alone, in my opinion. There's also a secondary mode called Robot Enrichment, which just allows you to buy cosmetic items to decorate the robots with. It's a neat little feature, and it's entirely optional, so I can't really hate on it too much. Finally, there's the Community Test Chambers mode. This mode is available right off the bat and doesn't require you to have beaten the base game. This mode integrates Steam Workshop support, meaning anyone can make a custom map and upload it to the workshop, and the maps can be playable solo or co-op too. This also means that Portal 2 technically has unlimited content, as people are still creating maps to this day. While I can't judge the game based on the quality of the maps, there are some really cool and unique maps here. So, like the first game, I also consider Portal 2 one of the greatest games ever made. It's got everything that made the first game special, but then some more. And I say this as someone who usually isn't a fan of puzzle games. If there's one game you decide to play after watching this video, play Portal 2. It's the complete package, and I guarantee there's something you will love here.
Bridge Constructor Portal was released in 2017. This game is actually a licensed sequel to another game series called Bridge Constructor and is made by Clockstone, not Valve. That being said, this game pretty much nails the aesthetic and atmosphere of Portal, even though it's a completely different genre of puzzle game. The testing rooms are here in full force and evoke the exact style we saw in the first 2 games, even though this is from a completely different developer. The idea behind this game is that you need to get the little forklift from the beginning of the level to the tube at the end by building bridges. The bridges can be built with as much support as you'd like, but you can only build them from predefined link points. This means that you have to learn how this game's physics work, because if a part of the bridge or one of the support beams you've created is under too much stress, it'll break, and that's not even counting the added stress of the forklift itself. Listen, we've all seen this kind of game before, and I don't feel like I have to go into a ton of detail about how the gameplay works, but what this game does to set itself apart is add in Portal's unique mechanics, including the portals themselves, sentry turrets, companion cube buttons, and even the Portal 2 gels. It works really well, and of course inertia and physics play a huge role in this just like they do in the normal Portal games, but the completely different gameplay style means that you have to think differently. It's still impressive how they made this feel like something that could naturally fit in the Portal universe though. Speaking of the Portal universe, there's a ton of fully voiced dialogue from GLaDOS too, which is a really cool touch. While the witty writing is a bit more subdued here, the game still firmly feels like Portal through and through with its tone. There's also Steam Workshop support in the PC version of this game, and there seems to be a pretty healthy community for it too. I looked into the top rated maps, and while a lot of them are tough challenges, there's also a ton of eye candy ones that just automatically work without any kind of player input required. Sure, you could argue that this defeats the purpose of the game, but at the same time, you can't deny that it's kind of mesmerizing to watch. This is a neat little game and becomes kind of challenging surprisingly fast. I'd highly recommend it if puzzle games you can play in short bursts are your cup of tea. And while I played the PC version here, I'm sure the smartphone version would be perfect as something that you can play on the go too.
The lab was released in 2016 and is exclusively played with a virtual reality device. This game is a series of little mini demos, and some are less games and more just interactive experiences. It's all set in this hub area, and the idea is that each one of the experiences is a pocket universe that you can just sorta jump into at any time. My favorite little touch is that as you go into each pocket universe, something from that universe is added to the central table here that you can play with. So I recorded my entire playthrough of this, but I've actually decided not to show everything because this is a super short experience, and I think if you have the means to, you absolutely should try it. This is especially true for robot repair, which blew my mind when I tried it. And trust me, don't just look up a video of it, because seeing it outside of VR isn't nearly as impressive. At the end of the day, this is a really fun experience, especially for its low price of free. If you're just getting into VR and want to experience something that can show you the capabilities of VR really fast, this is the game to do it. And even if you're a seasoned VR veteran, I'd still recommend giving this a shot if you haven't already. It doesn't take too much time to complete, and the robot repair section alone makes it all worth it to me. Aperture Hand Lab is a VR tech demo that was released in 2019. Again, this is only playable with a virtual reality device and is specifically intended to be played with Valve's Index. This game is another Valve tech demo using the Aperture Science aesthetic. This game's full purpose is to show off some of the features of the Valve Index controller. Unfortunately, because I'm using the Oculus controllers, some features don't work as intended, and I eventually got stuck on a specific spot just a few minutes in. The whole idea, though, is that you're interacting and getting real handsy with some of the personality cores. High fives, rock, paper, scissors, the works. There's even more that happens later on, but like I said, I unfortunately couldn't progress as far as I wanted because my controllers don't support the dynamic grip feature. This game in total is only around 20 minutes though, so you can get the gist of it. Aperture Desk Job was released in 2022 to coincide with the release of Valve's portable Steam Deck. While I played this on PC, I did it using a PlayStation 4 controller, and it worked perfectly fine. This game is short but sweet, and is basically a little tech demo about you working a desk job at Aperture Science in what seems to be the 70s. The whole time, you're being instructed by a personality core called Grady, and occasionally, you'll also hear instructions from Cave Johnson himself, with J.K. Simmons reprising the role. The gameplay here is less of a, game, and more of a fun little guided interactive story experience. It's kind of hard to review it as a game because of this. All of your controls are reflected at different times on your desk in front of you as the story progresses, and different controls do different things at different times. It's as straightforward gets. That being said, the writing is incredibly witty and a lot of fun. While you can complete this entire game in less than an hour, it's absolutely worth doing it for the fun writing alone. If you've got a PC with a controller or a Steam Deck, definitely download this. It's completely free and doesn't take more than an hour of your time. All you need is a controller. And that's it for every Portal game. For a series that has a bunch of games, I'm shocked there isn't an outright Portal 3 yet. I know, Valve can't count to 3 or whatever, but it's still really shocking, especially since there's all kinds of stories you could tell using Aperture Science's wacky history and the overall Half-Life universe. Now I know some people will be upset that I didn't play Narbacular Draw, but that's mainly because while it was what inspired Portal, it's not technically a Portal game itself. There's also the LEGO Dimensions Portal add-on. That one's kind of in the same boat, and even then, have you seen how much LEGO Dimensions goes for these days? Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this overview of the Portal games as much as I enjoyed making it. If you liked this video, definitely consider subscribing if you haven't already. And, as always, have a fantastic day!